talk about right effort. So today we're going to talk about right effort, and I just want to share some suttas that you can look up later and read if you're interested. The first one I'm going to talk about just gives the standard definition of right effort. And it comes from the Sangha, the one I'm using. This definition shows up in various places in the suttas, but the one I'm looking at right now is from the Samyutta Nikaya, or the linked discourses, number 49. So that's the actual Samyutta or book. And the numbers 1 through 12, it's a series of short suttas that change a little bit as you go through them. And it just gives the basic definition of right effort. It's when a mendicant generates enthusiasm, tries, makes an effort, exerts the mind, and strives so that bad, unskillful qualities don't arise. And I should say that this is Bhante Sujato's translation, and you'll see it's a little bit different in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations, but it's the same Pali, of course. So the translation varies by a few words. So that first one is that you strive to not have bad, unskillful qualities arise, or bad, unskillful mental states. Is also another way that it gets expressed sometimes. And then the second thing, there are 4 parts to this. The second one is generate enthusiasm, try, make an effort, exert the mind, and strive so that bad, unskillful qualities that have arisen are given up. So you find the ways to help those dissipate. The third piece is the same effort, the same exertion, so that skillful qualities arise. So skillful qualities, wholesome mental states arise. And the fourth piece, as you probably already know, is to make that effort and strive so that the skillful qualities that have arisen remain. And here it says, they remain, are not lost, but increase, mature, and are completed by development. So these are the 4 right efforts. Excuse me. Then in this sutta, the Buddha says, the Ganges slopes and inclines to the east. In the same way, a mendicant who develops and cultivates the 4 right efforts slants, slopes, and inclines to Nibbana. And then the other ones in this series say similar things about other rivers. They slope a certain way, and this is what causes us to slope or slant or incline towards Nibbana. And then there are a few versions where he talks about sloping to the ocean. And this is like when we practice right effort, it's like we are sloping towards Nibbana. It's like a natural movement towards full awakening. When you see a series like this, book 49 is actually about right effort. It's the whole collection. It's not very long, a number of short suttas, but it's all about this kind of right effort or right striving, sometimes is the translation. And, I think about how the Buddha taught for 45 years, and he used different metaphors, similes. He talked in different ways at different times, but always bringing that same point home. And in that collection, there are a number of other ways that the Buddha talks about these 4 ways to put forth effort. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the 4 right efforts with a little bit more description. And this sutta is from the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses in the book of fours, or the section on four, and it's number 14. So Anguttara Nikaya 4:14. And the Buddha says there are four efforts. And it's similar to what the previous one said. These efforts are to restrain, to give up, to develop, and to preserve. That covers those four pieces. And then he elaborates on what it means to restrain. He says, this is when a mendicant sees a sight with their eyes. They don't get caught up in the features and details. If the faculty of sight were left unrestrained, bad, unskillful qualities of desire and aversion would become overwhelming. For this reason, they practiced restraint, protecting the faculty of sight and achieving its restraint. And then when they hear a sound with their ears, a smell or an odor with their nose, taste a flavor with their tongue, feel a touch with their body, when they know a thought with their mind, they don't get caught up in the features and details. If the faculty of mind were left unrestrained, bad, unskillful qualities of desire and aversion would become overwhelming. For this reason, they practice restraint, protecting the faculty of mind and achieving its restraint. And then he says, and so that's the first one. So you're restraining the mind and the senses in order so the unwholesome, unskillful qualities don't arise. The second one is about giving up. So that's when a mendicant doesn't tolerate a sensual, malicious, or cruel thought that has arisen, and you might recognize those as wrong intention. But they give them up and get rid of them, eliminate them, and obliterate them. They don't tolerate any bad, unskillful qualities that have arisen, but give them up, get rid of them, eliminate them, obliterate them. This is another of the right effort, another kind of right effort. And then the third one, the effort to develop, it's when a mendicant develops the awakening factors of mindfulness, investigation of principles, energy, rapture, tranquility, immersion, which is another way to translate samadhi, and equanimity, which rely on seclusion. So this all comes from the 7 factors of enlightenment. And they rely on seclusion, fading away in cessation, and ripen in letting go. This is called the effort to develop. So this is what brings up wholesome qualities. And then what does it mean to have the effort to preserve? So when a mendicant preserves a meditation subject, that's a fine foundation for samadhi, for immersion. The perception, like the perception of a skeleton or a worm-infested corpse, a livid corpse, or a split open corpse, or a bloated corpse. You know, we've talked about these in the sutta study, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Particularly, he's pointing at those meditations on the body, the charnel ground meditations. Of course, it could be other things as well, but those are how he describes in this case the way that you accomplish those 4 right efforts. So any comments or questions so far? Yes, Jules.
I just want to say, I think the thing that I work on the most is giving up on skillful states. And probably the reason why I have to work on that so much is because I don't work on the other 3. And it's like, oh, I should be doing these other things. Then I wouldn't get there in the first place.
That's a really good observation. And of course, even when we're working on the other 3, those things can arise in the mind. And it's good to remember that it's from old karma. It's from having not worked on those in the past, or not having realized that we could. You know, I think many of us go through greater or lesser part of our life, not knowing that training the mind is an option, or that it's actually happening all the time, even if we're not aware that that's what's happening. We are training the mind. We're training the mind when we hang out with people who criticize things a lot, or we train the mind when we're hanging around people who have a really good attitude about life, or and just picking up what's around us and so forth, in many ways. And then to recognize, wow, I can make choices about this and it makes a difference. Yeah, thank you, Jules. A really good observation. Carrie?
Yeah, thank you. This morning when I was sitting out in the doorway there and listening to the birds, I noticed how much I love listening to the birds. And, I was aware of that, wanting more and more. But at the same time, I also had a lot of gratitude for being able to listen to the birds. And so this whole kind of instruction, I'm always concerned about repressing what's going on. All I did was kind of notice that I wanted the birds and wanted more of the birds, and reminded myself that will end. That's impermanent, they'll go away. And try to just cultivate the gratitude at the same time. So could you just say something about how those kind of, the craving, the gratitude, and the repression kind of all interface?
Yeah, I think this is a very challenging area of practice, because I think what's important is that we notice what the result is of our actions. So it's much more obvious when we are maybe walking through a shopping mall or something, and you see, you see images, advertisements, of people in a way that kind of evokes sexual desire or craving for something. And then that is kind of, those are the things the Buddha is talking about here, when sights, so we look at the results. What is the result of my looking at something or listening to it, etc., or tasting it? What does that evoke? And in the case of the birds, I think it depends. It's I think sometimes we feel like we should just shut out everything, but don't shut out the chanting that, lifts up the heart, or even particularly in lay life, the movie that brings inspiration and encouragement. It's not just a cut off everything. Consider what it is that brings you closer to the Dhamma. Consider that whatever we're taking in, is it bringing us closer to the Dhamma or further away? And excuse me, even our conversations, is it bringing us closer to happiness and peace, or is it moving us further away? Now, sitting in nature, listening to the birds can uplift and open the heart in a way that makes more peace and happiness, a lightness. The Buddha was really encouraged us to have that happiness, because we're much more likely to have good meditation. We're much more likely to see the good in other people. We're much more likely to see the good in ourselves if we're happy. And so it's I really look at the result. And the result isn't the same every time you do the same thing. Sometimes it can bring up a craving or a desire or a disappointment or discontent. But if we go about the practice as a way of kind of clamping down on ourselves, and it's hard, because it's we want to deny ourselves from indulging in things that don't lead us to happiness and peace, out of delusion, thinking I'm going to feel better, or I'm going to finally be satisfied, or something like that. So, like you said, knowing this is impermanent, knowing yeah, it's not going to make me happy forever, knowing, I don't want to come back for this. Doesn't still, it's not healthy to go the other direction. And it's like, oh, I shouldn't be in at all, like attending to these sounds. And I hope that, that's an encouragement to be discerning about what are the results of doing this. And you can do that with everything and just see. And we, of course, have to be careful about delusion, because we really can kid ourselves, and we want to make sure we make an effort to be as honest as possible with ourselves about what's really going on in the mind. And usually we can be more honest with ourselves if we're less punitive and judgmental. So it's like children, they lie if they're gonna feel they're gonna get punished. And we don't want to punish ourselves, but we just want to guide and learn and direct ourselves and encourage ourselves further towards the wholesome.
Thank you.
Anything else at the moment? Okay, I will continue on. So the next one is also in the Anguttara Nikaya, and it's in the section on eights. It's Anguttara Nikaya 880, and it's the grounds for laziness and the grounds for arousing energy. So he said there are 8 grounds for laziness. And this is when this is the way someone thinks, well, I have some work to do, but that's going to make me tired, so I better lie down. Or the second one, I've done some work, but while I was working, I got tired, so I better lie down. Now, the Buddha is saying these things. It's true, but it's also kind of tongue in cheek. Not exactly, but it's humorous in a way, just kind of like the way we like avoid really practicing. So he says, and actually I should kind of read at least one in its entirety. This next one, a mendicant has to go on a journey, and they think, I have to go on a journey, but while walking, my body will get tired. I'd better have a lie down. I better lie down. And they lie down, and they don't rouse energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. This is the 3rd ground. Or they have gone on a journey, and they think, well, I've been on a journey, and while I was walking, my body got tired, so I'd better lie down. And then they lie down, and they don't rouse energy for that good progress. Or a mendicant has wandered for alms, but they didn't get to fill up on as much food as they like. And they think, well, I didn't get as much food as I'd like to have. My body is tired and unfit for work. I'd better lie down. So they lie down and don't rouse energy for achieving what's yet unachieved. Or they wander for alms, and they get to fill up on as much food as they like. And then they think, oh, my body is heavy, unfit for work. So I've just eaten, it says here, like I've just eaten a load of beans. I'd better have a lie down. I better lie down. And they don't arouse energy for practice. Or the mendicant feels a little sick. I feel a little sick. Lying down would be good for me. I'd better lie down. Or they're just recovering from an illness. I've recently recovered from an illness. My body is weak and unfit for work. I'd better lie down. These are the 8 grounds for laziness. And now he gives the opposites. To the first one, a mendicant has some work to do, and they think, I have some work to do. While I'm working, it's not easy to focus on the teachings of the Buddha. So I'd better preemptively rouse up energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. And they do it. They do it. And the second one, I've done some work. While I was working, I wasn't able to focus on the teachings of the Buddha. So I'd better now preemptively rouse up some energy, better, like get on it. And they do it. When they're going on a journey, they're going to go on a journey. They'll think ahead of time. While I'm on the journey, it's not going to be easy to practice. And so I'm going to rouse the energy now. I'm going to practice now. Or I've gone on the journey, and while I was on the journey, I wasn't able to practice, so I'm going to really do it right now. That kind of thing. They wander for alms. They don't get as much food as they like. They think, oh, I didn't get as much food as I'd like to have. My body is light and fit for work, and so I should practice now. Or they've gotten as much food as they want, and it says, yeah, my body, I've gotten as much food as I want. My body is strong and fit for work, and I'm going to, do it now. The part about being sick, I feel a little sick. Maybe this illness is going to get worse. I'd better practice now. Or I've just recovered from this illness, but you never know, it might come back. I'd better practice now. They rouse energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. So I know for myself, I can identify times when I've said, I better lie down. And sometimes it's true. We do need to rest, but it's good to keep an eye on that and see if we are able to actually make good use of the time. Ajahn Kanha is very much like, yeah, don't sleep. You can sleep when you're dead. It's like, so we have to know for ourselves what's really beneficial. And then the last one I think that I'll share before we stop is, let's see, is that true? Maybe there's one little one after that. Maybe there's just a couple little things after this one, but this one is about Sona, and many of you have heard this teaching of the Buddha. This is from Anguttara Nikaya 655, and it's when the Venerable Sona was practicing really hard, and he thought, I'm one of the Buddha's most energetic disciples, and yet my mind is not freed from defilements by not grasping. Well, my family has wealth, and I could enjoy that wealth, and I could make merit by being generous. Why don't I resign the training? Why don't I give up and go back to lay life? And the Buddha, with his ability to know what other people are thinking, he realizes this even though he's not anywhere near where Sona is. Sona is at Rajagaha, and the Buddha is up on Vulture's Peak Mountain. So it says here that as easily as a strong person would extend or contract their arm, the Buddha vanished from Vulture's Peak and reappeared in front of Sona. And he sat down on a seat that was spread out. And Sona bowed to him, and the Buddha said, so when you were in private retreat, did this thought come to your mind? I'm one of the Buddha's most energetic disciples, and yet my mind is not freed from defilements by not grasping, but my family has wealth, and I could enjoy that wealth and make merit. Shouldn't I just give up the holy life and go back to lay life? And Sona says, yes, sir. I did think that. And then the Buddha gives this very famous teaching. The musical instrument is a little, I've not heard it be a harp before, but here is Ajahn Bhante Sujato's translation. What do you think, Sona? When you were a layman, weren't you a good harp player? He says, yes. When your harp strings were tuned too tight, was it resonant and playable? No. When your harp strings were tuned too slack, was it resonant and playable? No. But when your harp strings were tuned neither too tight nor too slack, but fixed at an even tension, was it resonant and playable? Yes. In the same way, Sona, when energy is too forceful, it leads to restlessness. When energy is too slack, it leads to laziness. So you should apply yourself to energy and serenity. So that's really key. It's like energetic but serene. Find a balance of the faculties and learn the pattern of this situation. Learn about yourself. Learn about what brings about energy and serenity. So after this advice, the Buddha vanished and reappeared on Vulture's Peak. And then Sona really applied himself to energy and serenity. And it didn't take very long before he realized Nibbana, or as it says here, he was living alone, withdrawn, diligent, keen, and resolute, soon realized the supreme culmination of the spiritual path in this very life. He lived having achieved with his own insight the goal for which people rightly go forth from the lay life to homelessness. And he understood rebirth is ended. The spiritual journey has been completed. What had to be done has been done, and there's no return to any state of existence. He became one of the arahants. Now, this last part I find really interesting and inspiring. Usually it's not talked about as far as I've heard or been exposed to. So he says, what if I go to the Buddha and I declare my enlightenment in his presence? So he goes to the Buddha, he bows down, and then he says, Sir, a mendicant who is perfected, with defilements ended, who has completed the spiritual journey, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, achieved their own true goal, utterly ended the fetters of rebirth, and is rightly freed through enlightenment, is dedicated to 6 things. They're dedicated to renunciation, seclusion, kindness, the end of craving, the end of grasping, and mental clarity. And he says, someone here might think, well, maybe this venerable, meaning himself, maybe he's dedicated to renunciation solely out of mere faith. In other words, you have faith in the Buddha. The Buddha says, be renunciant, all that stuff we read about sight, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, he's doing that out of faith. And he says they shouldn't think like that. A mendicant with defilements ended doesn't see in themselves anything more to do or anything that needs improvement. They're dedicated to renunciation because they're free from greed, hate, and delusion. With the end, it's the absolute, utter, complete end of greed, hatred, and delusion in themselves. And so then he says, someone here might think that he's dedicated to seclusion because of enjoying possessions, honor, and popularity. So like if we want possessions, honor, and popularity, maybe we focus on meditation to try to deal with that. But he says, don't think like that. Same thing, you're free of that because you're free of greed, hatred, and delusion. You want to meditate and be at peace because you don't have any desire to look for anything else. And then also he said, then I really love this one. It's like maybe this venerable is dedicated to kindness because they believe that adhering to precepts and observances is the most important thing. It's like you're being kind because you have to keep the precepts. But he says it's not like that. The kindness is just there naturally because you're free of greed, hatred, and delusion. And this is one of the things that I found from the beginning so inspiring about the Buddhist teachings. It felt so true because that kindness arises naturally out of seeing the truth and ridding oneself of greed, hatred, and delusion. And the same with craving. There's an end of craving because you're free of those three defilements. Also, the end of grasping and being dedicated to clarity of mind is also because you're free of those three, greed, hatred, and delusion. So when he says, when a person's mind is rightly freed like this, even if compelling sights come into range of vision, they don't overcome the mind. It's not like you don't notice them, but they don't get a foothold. The mind remains unaffected. It's steady, imperturbable, observing disappearance. So the mind is more focused on when that sense impression goes away. And the same with sounds, smells, tastes, and touches, and thoughts. They come into the range of the mind, but they don't overcome the mind. The mind remains unaffected. So this is something we can kind of observe in ourselves. Maybe there's we see that sometimes. And then he says, suppose there's a mountain that is one solid mass of rock without cracks or holes. Even if violent storms blow up out of the east, west, north, and south, they couldn't make it shake or rock or tremble. That's the way a person's mind is when it's rightly freed from the defilements. Unshakable. When you're dedicated to renunciation, seclusion of the heart, when you're dedicated to kindness and the end of grasping, when you're dedicated to the ending of craving and clarity of heart, and you've seen the arising of senses, your mind is rightly freed. For that one, rightly freed, a mendicant with peaceful mind, there's nothing to be improved and nothing more to do. As the wind cannot stir a solid mass of rock, so too sights, tastes, sounds, smells, and touches, the whole lot, and thoughts, whether liked or disliked, don't disturb the poised one. Their mind is steady and free as they observe disappearance. And then the last thing I want to point out is a series of suttas also in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Nines, where the Buddha talks about using the four right efforts as a way to keep the 5 precepts. So if we're having any trouble or weakness with any of the 5 precepts, we use those 4 right efforts. Yeah, he says the same thing about the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth, and torpor, restlessness, and remorse, and doubt. We use the 4 right efforts to overcome them. And finally, he says there are 5 emotional shackles. When you're not free of greed, desire, fondness, thirst, passion, and craving for sensual pleasures. And what you can do to overcome that is apply the 4 right efforts. So I'm going to stop with the sutta references right there, even though there are more. It's pretty interesting when you start digging around in there, how much more there is besides just the simple definition. So I think maybe now we'll meditate for a little while, and then we can talk a bit more about any questions or comments or experiences you want to share. So today, let's see. Oh, you having trouble seeing me? I'm being swamped with sunlight.
It's quite lovely, actually.
That's the light of Nibbana, right? reminding us to, oh, no, it's okay. Thank you, sister.
Neil was like,
Yeah. Gee, yes, the Dhamma is spoken. It just like, no, I don't, just kidding. Okay,
the other side closed too or not?
I think it's okay. Thank you.
We could see you were enlightened.
Yeah, no, that looks good now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, things keep changing. Next, oh no, next week, we're still going to be on the same time, right? Until Sunday.
No, that's this week. And
That's
it's
this
changing.
week to not tomorrow night. It changes. Okay, so next time the sun will be different on Saturday morning. And while I'm thinking of it, Saturday morning next week will be our last session of this for a while we're on retreat. And hopefully I'll share that again next week. Okay, we'll just meditate for about 20 minutes and give some chance for discussion, more discussion. So find a comfortable position. So I like to always start with some long breaths. Our friend Dr. Jocelyn, I think, is the one who pointed out that this kicks off the parasympathetic nervous system reaction that brings more calm, soothes some of those anxious or excited kind of impulses we have, or states of mind. So right there, we can begin to observe what brings a more wholesome, happy, contented state of mind. Just breathing in, breathing out, letting go of tension in the body. We observe our whole body. At the same time, we're noticing and keenly aware that we're breathing in or that we're breathing out. And this already begins to occupy the mind. And it also helps the body to continue to deepen relaxation. Sometimes in the beginning, if our mind is quite restless, we can think the words in breath or breathing in, breathing out, is to begin to corral the mind. But then once the mind is more settled, we don't have to think words. We can just feel the motion of the in-breath and the out-breath. And we can imagine it permeating the whole body. When we breathe in, we can imagine the in-breath coming into the lungs and filling the whole body, and then filling all the extremities with breath energy. Even if it isn't a tangible feeling, although sometimes it may be that you can actually feel sensations. Running through the whole body. And just let it be a calming, steadying effect. And when we breathe out, we can encourage a deeper relaxation and letting go, purification, letting go of anything that's stagnant or irritating, inhibiting. We don't even have to put much attention on those unwholesome experiences, feelings, mental states. We can just let the breath carry them away. Or I like that image that Ajahn Jaya Saro uses sometimes on that, like words written on water. If we have anxiety or tension or worry or whatever might be causing unrest in the mind, we can imagine it printed or written on water. And then just observe how the waves, the movement of the water causes that to just break up and float away. So when we use skillful images like this, or maybe the sound of the birds if we're outside, or whatever it might be that helps us to deepen and become more still, peaceful, content. This is a skillful means. The Buddha placed peace at the highest level. So his brief teaching to his mother and his stepmother, Mahapajapati, was that if something causes you to move towards peace, it's the Dhamma. If it causes you to move away from peacefulness, it's not the Dhamma. So when we establish ourselves in a way that's steady, then we can maintain that steadiness, that peaceful, calm feeling, mental state, even if other things arise out of the reaches of the mind or coming in through the senses. And we can see it for what it is, just a passing thought or a passing sense experience. We can notice the ending of it. Oh, that thought is fading away. And it will, unless we make an effort to hold on to it, which is what we do sometimes. We destroy our own peace. We can make that choice, let go of the unwholesome, the disturbing. Desirable or undesirable, we let go of the craving, the identification with whatever it is. And it's always detrimental to think it's me or mine. But we also don't squash it, shove it under the rug, because then it's not resolved. It's going to be lurking there, waiting to pop out again and make trouble. So what we see and feel, we recognize it first. And That's a wholesome thought. That's an unwholesome thought, whatever it is. And we don't layer any kind of self-criticism over it or judgment. We just, whatever arises in the mind, that's just the way it is. That's just conditioning from the past. It's just like any, sound coming from the neighbor's house or an airplane overhead or whatever. We don't have control of these things. We just notice them. We notice the feelings that arise when we experience them. And that's what we have choice about. We have a choice to react to that or not. We have a choice to let go of our judgments and likes and dislikes. So we can use this time to observe and notice and choose, inviting the body to be calm and the mind to be calm. And we can choose to give the mind something uplifting to consider. We can use our discernment and our creativity to know what that is right now that's going to be beneficial to the mind. Welcome back, everyone. I don't know now if when you finish your meditation on your own, there's a voice that says, welcome back in your head. I've always kind of wondered about saying that. It's a little funny, but got to start the conversation somehow. It is nice to see you when my eyes open and there you are in the room and on the screen. So, any thoughts about today's topic or anything else? Oh, Paula. Oh yeah, sometimes I can't when the color of the hand is light against a light background, sometimes I miss it. Sorry. Go ahead, Paula.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to change that. I just recently switched it to a different color and I don't know why. I have a question. This is just a technical question. People already may know this. I may have just missed this, but I've been reading about, there's roots and then there's hindrances and then there's defilements. Maybe I could have looked it up. Sometimes when I look things up online, it doesn't really answer it. So I thought I'd just ask you if you could. I know what hindrances are, and I also found it real interesting that in our sutta study this week, we were talking about hindrances, and then today, in time with right action, they kind of mesh together a lot of the same information. But are the roots just the greed, hatred, and delusion, and then the defilements, are those the hindrances? Or can you explain? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. The hindrances, those 5, the sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, etc. Those are the things that the Buddha identified as being primary hindrances to our meditation. Things to watch out for there. And of course, the fundamental roots of defilement, greed, hatred, and delusion are, behind all those and everything else that causes us to suffer, experience dukkha. And the Buddha he had different lists. He had the latent tendencies and the different kinds of delusion and ignorance and desires and so on. And it's useful, whatever in there is useful to describe the experience we're having and to help us make wise choices about how to practice. We should use them. And I don't get too deep into trying to tease them apart clearly, because they don't really tease apart clearly. They can be different lenses on our experience. And so it's good to have a kind of an idea of what people are talking about, but it's also not necessary to be too deep into the definitions. I think, just looking at, what does this mean? Hindrances, it's good to know what they are and how knowing what they are can help us when we're meditating and working with states of mind. And as far as the roots, underlying roots, yeah, they're going to have to be cut off, but how do you do it? You can't just say, okay, I'm going to really cut off my ignorance now. It doesn't quite work like that. So we have to look, if we use the 4 right efforts to really work with, okay, is this mental state that I'm having right at the moment, is this wholesome or unwholesome? And how am I going to deal with it? What are the causes that bring up more wholesome mental states? And how do I keep them going? Just very practical.
I think I understand that. I just didn't know, because it's referred to the roots, and I just want to know exactly what that reference is, and if that's something different than the hindrances and other, or does it overlap, or I
It's
just kind of
different.
need to know because it's so often referred to, and then I'm like, well, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, the Buddha might talk about roots in different ways, depending on what he's teaching. Like
Oh.
he's very into cause and effect, like, okay, we have something here that we're observing. Now, what's the root of this? Where does it start? What's underlying it, so that we can know how to cut it off.
So
I
there
would
are
say-
no particular 3 exact roots. It could be it could be kind of different in each situation, depending on what's being discussed or what's being referred to.
Yeah,
or
it might
what
be
sutta.
said in little different ways. I mean, most of the time it's greed, hatred, and delusion.
Okay, that's
But you also
helpful.
might, see the Buddha talk about ignorance as the root of something, or attachment is the root of our, clinging, or, I mean, you just might see him use that in different ways.
I won't worry about it.
That's my idea. Don't worry about
Okay.
it. Now, you might
Yeah.
get some other teacher who's got, just happy to talk about the lists. If you study Abhidhamma, you're going to probably know, like every list of things and how they you have to recognize that can just cause a lot of mental activity.
Yeah, and I have enough of that. I don't need more of that.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, you do need to ask a clarifying question if it keeps popping up and bugging you. Just kind of
Yeah.
get rid of it.
Yeah. So the Buddha will define things in different ways in different places in the suttas, like how many feelings that there are, or things like that, or what's at the
Right.
root of something. And so just, look at the context and see, what he's talking about there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, Helen?
Can you hear me, folks?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your talk, Ayya, and for the good questions we've heard so far. I appreciate them. This is an applied question about applying a precept, like sort of the granularness of not taking that which is not freely given.
Mhm.
So it's right effort in terms of, well, never mind. So I'm a householder, and there are occasions where somebody owes me money for labor that I've done. That's valid. That's for labor that I've done. Sometimes there's annoyance on the part of the person who owes me money that I've earned. And there's a need to request it, and to set up a payment plan, so to speak.
Mhm.
And whenever I say, okay, it's time to make a payment, there's something about it that feels, well, first of all, I wish I were in a moneyless society, so that's for sure. But is somebody who doesn't want to compensate one for something that they've earned, is that an example of someone not freely giving? Or you see what my question
I mean,
is?
they're not freely giving, but that isn't what the precept is about.
Mhm.
I mean, there are things, of course, to learn from a situation like this, like maybe you never want to do work for them again, or maybe you need the contract in writing,
Mhm.
and come back each time they pay part of it, and everybody initials that, something like that.
Mhm.
I mean, you can have a conversation if they don't think they owe you that money, and you do, to sort that out. And it's better to walk away and take a loss than to have a disturbance of your peace of mind,
Mhm.
or doubt about whether or not you're being fair.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if you are being fair, it feels clear that you are being fair, then it's perfectly reasonable to ask for it, to think of it in terms of trying to support them in doing what they're supposed to do. And, try to separate out as much as possible feelings of resentment, greed, like imagine just walking away from the whole thing and not getting paid at all and just saying, okay, this was a good lesson. I can set it up differently next time. But that's definitely preferable over being upset, worried, angry, et cetera, et cetera. You know that already. So it's not the same as taking something that's not rightfully yours, or or taking something that isn't meant for you. It's like, and in the fine grain of that, it's like this one friend of ours, what she noticed after taking the precepts was simple things, like she was working as a person who would go into companies' office buildings and water their plants. That was her job. And she said, there's a candy dish on the counter. And in the past, she might have just helped herself. But then, she got to thinking, well, that's not really meant for me. That's meant for the customers, right? Or whatever. So then she said, there are certain businesses where they'll say, when you come, help yourself to a drink in the fridge. And then she would tell them, okay, I'm here. I'm going to take my drink out of the fridge. Okay. And so the clarity of, what's really meant for me and what isn't. But if you've done work for someone, you have an agreement, then it's good to try to support them to do the right thing too, but try to do it not from a selfish place. And just like, well, this is the right thing. They should pay what they agreed to pay. It's okay to ask if that's required, but it's a shame it's required. Yeah. So you can make decisions about, what you know about their situation, if you want to let it go, or if you want to let it ride or whatever. But yeah, it's not like we want to be too complicit in other people's really irresponsible behaviors either.
Yeah. Thank you. May I pose one other very quick thing?
Sure.
So this is also about freely given. So I take a walk often at a local cemetery, and they have a chapel, and in the chapel there is a water bubble. There's a big, not very big, and there's cups next to it, and one is supposed to, kind of drink water there. And I used to go in and fill up my water bottle there. And then I thought, that's not quite the right thing to do. So I went over and asked, may I fill up my water bottle from your jug? And the woman glared at me. She glared at me and then said, yes. And it's not, and I said, and I almost said, I don't know if that's what you would want me to do, but if everybody does it, then it drains the water down. And I wanted to take care of her.
You're
For me to ask. I didn't go bore into her head about it. I just said, thank you. And then, see, I get granular about these kind of things because I want to be true and honest about this. So I just thought I'd lift that up. If something has to be requested, is it then not freely given? I don't mean to be petty about this, but I think about these things.
Well, it's important to think about these things, I think, because there is the unspoken message also. And yeah, sometimes when we ask for things, then people feel obliged, and maybe that isn't really what they want. And so it's probably better to just not do it, just find another way that's more free of any kind of sort of dangling things, strings. whatever. And, you know, it's like, yeah, it's no fun being glared at, but it's much worse to be the one doing the glaring.
Thank you. True.
Yeah.
Thank you,
welcome.
Ayya. Thanks, folks.
Yeah, Jules.
So I had an ethical question about how far we should feel obligated to help other people. And as example, there was an incident that happened a few years ago. Helen and I were going for a walk in the park, and we found someone sprawled out across the path. And he looked like he was someone who had OD'd. I called 911, and we were waiting for the EMTs to come, and I was still on phone to the dispatcher, who then wanted us to do CPR on this person.
Gosh.
I guess because it slows the heart down and the lungs down. And we were asked how far apart are the breaths. They were really far apart. And this was someone who looked like they're probably unhoused. They might be a drug addict. They had sores around their mouth, and all I could think is, I don't want to get hepatitis. And so I said no. Helen did pressed compressions, but the dispatcher kept saying something about doing mouth to mouth, and both of her saying, no, we're not going to do that. And then the EMTs did come, and they gave him Narcan, and he survived, and it was okay. But it was a real feeling of like, there's just the limit of how far my compassion is going to go. I don't want to risk my health in this situation. So I was just wondering, in the teachings, is there anything about how far you really have to go in sacrificing yourself to help another person?
It's a very good question. And when you look at early Buddhism, yeah, there are situations described like in the Vinaya, because the Vinaya is very legalistic and precise. Excuse me. Excuse me. So it's very precise about such things so that you know whether you've broken a precept or not. And the way it's laid out is you to break a precept around, like, let's say, what are we talking about here? I mean, there is no precept, I don't think, that really is like this. If he had died, the point is you didn't do anything to hasten that. You didn't do anything to harm him. And the way it's described, even if the monk is sitting on the bank of the river and someone falls in and is swept away, they're not obliged to go fish them out of the river. And that's part of, like, they are not breaking any precept by sitting there and staying put. Now, to some people, that seems outrageously cruel. But it isn't. It's just that you have to know where the lines are in terms of what's right and wrong, and what's, really the baseline, right? So of course, if you have the ability, you might fish them out of the river. If you're not a good swimmer and you're probably going to drown yourself, it's probably not a good idea to jump in after them. And this is a similar kind of situation in a way. It feels to me very strange for an EMT to ask a civilian to do that. You're not trained in that, I don't imagine. And, like, how can you expect, people just finding someone like that to take it that far? That's my view. It's not it's not based on anything but my own perception. So I'll just try to be clear about that. But I would say, it's not it's not, you're not trying to be harmful. You did what you could within what was comfortable for you to do to help this person, and you did help them. You got the right, people on site. And yeah, I mean, it can be confusing. It can be unsettling, but I think the best thing is to know you didn't break any precepts. You didn't do anything wrong. Let it go.
And this is Helen. I do know CPR, but I didn't have the equipment to protect myself. I didn't have a mouth guard.
Yeah.
So I did what I knew I was able to do, which is to apply compressions, because I've had a lot of training. But I was like, I'm not doing that. And the EMT was actually angry. Is that right, Jules? The
Yes.
EMT was angry. And I said, I'm not going to put my mouth on his mouth. I don't have a mouth guard. I don't have it. I'm not going to do it. So I had the training to be able to do it, but I withheld it. So
No, I personally, I mean, I can give you my personal, so that what I said was, that's what you see in the canon.
yeah.
You didn't have any intention to harm. You had an intention to help, but you took it as far as you could with, your own safety in mind, and that's perfectly reasonable opinion. And so that's the example from the Vinaya, and I think from our social perspective, or from a karmic perspective, people do things that contribute to their own karma. And, it's his good karma, I guess, that the EMTs came in along, and he could be revived. It'd be really good karma if that causes him to change his life in a way that brings more freedom and happiness to him. But you never even know if it's exceptionally good karma to just pass away. It's like that also could be a positive, so so I just think the Buddha would probably encourage us to not hold on to the experience, let it go, have peace of mind, understand that there are limits to anything we might be able to do in a situation, and you didn't break precepts.
Thank you.
Yeah, and whether someone else is angry about it, when we talked about right speech, that's not the criterion, and for your actions, that's also not the criterion to be concerned about. Unless it's an arahant that's angry. Well, they wouldn't be angry, but if they would be able to criticize us for something, then we want to be paying attention to that. But if a normal person that's still struggling from greed, hatred, and delusion is critical of us, then we can take it under advisement, but we don't have to trust it completely. Tim?
This is a little bit of a complicated story that's kind of in a similar vein, but I'll try and make it brief. Where this is maybe an example of taking action to help someone basically against their objection. And I was working at Dhamma alone, doing maintenance there. The center near Joshua Tree, Ruth Dennison Center. And it was midday. I drove into town, the 5-mile road, the 29 Palms Highway, which goes between, it's one of the main 2-lane highway there. Stopped at the stop sign. It's about 90 degrees out. It's Mojave Desert. A bus stopped across the street. And I just sat there and was watching, just waiting. The bus pulled away, and a young woman was standing there on the other side of the highway. And then I just thought, I don't know what's going on here. She walked across the highway to the road that I was on. And as she's walking past me on the other side of the street, I see she's wearing just well, in her late 20s, wearing just a light cotton dress. She's wearing hospital socks.
Mm.
And I thought, there's something very strange. She has nothing with her, no water bottle, no backpack, no hat, nothing. And I walked, and she walked past me and then was obviously already succumbing to the heat. And she just walked maybe 10 feet off the side of the road and sat down in the shade of a bush. This is the Mojave Desert, right? You know, even it's right on the highway, it's extremely desolate. I thought, this is crazy. You know, something's really, really wrong. So I turned around, I pulled up kind of on the shoulder and opened the door, opened the window, and I just happened to have a cold bottle of water and a cold bottle of Gatorade with me just for emergency. I called her and said, you know, what can I help you? Of course, you know, she's a little nervous. We're in the middle of nowhere, right? She came over to the window and I said, you know, I have cold water. You know, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, but maybe you should get out of the sun and open the right rear passenger door and sit there. So she actually got in the back seat. I gave her a bottle of water. And she was obviously in distress. And I was talking to her and she said, I asked her where she was going. She said she was walking to her friend's house. This is a desolate 5-mile road.
Yeah.
Going off to the north
Yeah.
into the middle of nowhere with a house like every half a mile.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm going to get you help. So I called emergency and she kind of freaked out and said, are you calling the cops? And, so I called emergency. I said, don't worry, they're going to help you. She really did not. I think she may have been in the hospital for drug addiction or something. You know, she just didn't seem really together. And
yeah, so it sounds like your question is like what to do in a case like that when you can tell someone's going to be in trouble.
Yeah,
But of
she could have
course,
died out there.
you know, calling the authorities is the last thing she would want. And too bad you couldn't just call Uber and send her wherever she wanted to go.
Well, where she wanted to go, I don't think she really knew where she wanted to go. And so the sheriff came, the EMTs came with the fire truck. They were all there, and I was talking to her, and I gave her my bottle of Gatorade, and they took care of her. But that was clearly over her objection because she was. But I actually think she was out of sight. I think she actually might have died right there because of exposure. You know,
I mean, those are kinds of situations where you make a judgment call, and it's just hard to know. Person doesn't have a whole lot of knowledge or context in a case like that about what's really going on. So it's hard to say. Hopefully she got the help she needed and started doing better. But I don't.
She walked out of. There was a hospital just down the road. I think she walked out of the hospital and just got on a bus.
Yeah.
That's what I think happened.
Yeah,
so,
that's probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to practice karuna.
Yeah.
And take action.
Well, we're over time, and I appreciate everyone's sharing and questions. I hope that this right effort is a useful theme for you for this week. Yes, Joyce, go ahead.
Just need to check about whether you should include the shares on the recording. We had quite a few shares. We had 2 brief ones at the very beginning, and Paula, Helen, Jules, and Tim. Any objections?
Would anyone like to leave it out? Yes, Jules, you're going to say something?
It's okay with me.
Okay, keep it in. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we'll keep it all in. That's really helpful, I think, to people. So I hope you have a great week. we're going to talk about right mindfulness next time, and that'll be our last Saturday morning for a while. We'll pick it up again after next week. We'll pick it up. We'll be on retreat until the beginning of the new year, and then we'll pick it up again. And hopefully I'll have more good things to report about Samadhi having had retreat. So see you next week, I hope, and take care. And, be kind to yourself. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Merry Christmas.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas to you all. Oh, I'll get to, you get
Next
to
week.
wish me that next week.
Next week.
Oh, right.
Bye-bye.